Hey guys, Nick here. I'm not going to do all the hoopla this week because there's not really a whole lot of news. I thought I'd just sit down and have a talk. Part of my reasoning is I saw this article on Game Rant, which I'll go ahead and pull up now. You could see that they're saying that the CPU looks like it's probably going to be the same between versions of the Xbox Series X. And what this kind of got me thinking of, for the most part, when you're looking at this, because it's saying it's going to have a cheaper spin-off called Project Lockhart, which we've heard about and we've kind of talked about a little bit here and there. I know that rumors have been flying all over the place about this thing. That the CPU is going to be fine, which means they've got to underclock somewhere else, right? They either have to underclock by downgrading the GPU or downgrading the RAM or cache memory or a mix of both. Because you can have the same clock speed, but you can have less cache, which means you process things less quickly. The difference between, like, say, an i5 and an i7 or an i9, right? Just a cheaper, more affordable, budget conscious model. Um, so, with that said, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to adjust the development to make sure that these continue to perform almost equally, which can hurt development frame rate, processing power, and the ability for the console to be able to render things and do things that its competitors can do because they kept the same hardware model across the board. Um, the PS5, for example, has two models as well, but they have a physical model and a digital model. They're not changing any of the hardware specs on the internals at all. So the hardware you get is the hardware you get. So when developers go to make a game, all they have to do is make it for those specs. And then you're either going to download it or you're going to put the disc in. Pretty much that's irrelevant to them as a developer because everything's going to function the same. Everything's going to access the same. There's not going to be differences in specs. There's not going to be differences in resolutions, anything like that, except for it just determining your monitor output and them having the assets. In the case of the Lockhart and previously the Xbox 360 as another example, and even the Wii and the Wii U, um, this can cause multiple things to happen. One, it can cause problems with development, meaning you can't use certain things. Like with the 360, you couldn't use the hard drive as cache anymore like you could on the Xbox. That affected gameplay significantly for some games because they were using that to preload things into memory quicker so that you had less loading time overall for the console. It felt more like a seamless experience. That ended with the 360. The Lockhart may have similar quirks. We don't know what those quirks are yet. The Wii and the Wii U, the Wii U with its two different models, confused a lot of people because they didn't know the difference between the white one and the black one was the fact that it had more memory and its specs were slightly better, I believe. It didn't affect the gameplay much because Nintendo pretty much level set everything that was going in there, and since their hardware technology was so far behind, it didn't really affect much in that case. But it did affect your storage and how quickly you needed to buy an external hard drive. Um, so, with that said, this could negatively impact the games and their performance and the levels as far as what the Xbox is capable of doing because they're going to want everything to look and feel the same for the end user regardless of which console you bought. Now, I don't know how much cheaper this one's supposed to be. I know development costs are going up in this next generation, so game costs are likely to go up, so this console is likely to look more appealing in the long run. I heard a rumor today that NBA 221K is going to cost roughly $70 US just for the base game. So prices of games are going up by at least $10 likely in this generation, and that's pretty overdue, if I'm honest. We've had two or three generations where games have sat at $60, and development costs have continued to climb. They have compensated by that by selling more DLC, by cutting costs elsewhere, and then selling it back to us as other DLC, or by adding in microtransactions to try to make up costs and to come out ahead. Um, so now we're starting to catch up to the point to where they're not going to do that anymore. Well, they'll probably do those things, but they're also going to charge you more for the game. So having a cheaper console option is probably going to be, at least in the short term, of interest to a lot of people. I am not sure how I feel about this. I would rather just pay the money for the higher end console, which is what I have traditionally done in the past with all of my consoles. I don't like it when they differentiate specs. It makes development harder. it can introduce more bugs and more problems as things go along, because you have to develop things for either to basically be able to tell which spec is which and install itself and run itself accordingly, which makes the code more complex, which can introduce more bugs and errors in the code. Or you basically just have yourself level setting and hitting this middle ground of almost mediocrity, so that things continue to perform the same across the board. Meaning you're not going to get the same frame rate, you're not going to get the same graphical detail, you're not going to get the same performance level out of it, even with those things cut, that you would on a system that, say, just cut out, say, a disk drive and gave you the exact same hardware. So from that standpoint, I'm a little concerned as far as the direction they're going with this Series X and the Lockhart. I think in the long run, it could hurt Microsoft more than it can help them. They're already dealing with a lot, in my opinion, by having more of an ecosystem than a console. And that reason being is that you're bringing these things out on Windows, where people have all sorts of specs, which introduces more complexity in everything that you have to have, because it's already basically ported to PC at that point. Then you have multiple specs on your own physical hardware. So even if you want to optimize it for the Series X and say, hey, it runs on Windows, you still have problems there, because you have 2 to 3 different specs of hardware now that you have to deal with and accommodate for in order to run the game. Whereas on the PS5, essentially you have one hardware spec, you just have, do you want a disk drive or not? And that's it. It gets very simple. It makes it very clean to develop for, and everybody knows all the tricks, and they work across the board. You don't have to worry about power. You don't have to worry about memory. You don't have to worry about how much GPU RAM you have here and how much you have to offload to the cache. You don't have to worry about the cache being short. You don't have to worry about the RAM being shorted. You don't have to worry about CPU clock speeds or anything like that. Everything is level set across the board, and it really streamlines development when you can do that. So this is mostly a 7-minute. I'm slightly concerned for this particular product and for multiple versions of a console in a generation. I thought they were pushing it with the PS4 Pro and the Xbox Series and the Xbox One X as well, in the middle of a generation of trying to up the specs to accommodate for things like 4K and stuff like that. I didn't see a lot of stuff getting a lot better. Some people reported some performance increases, but they weren't huge. But this is coming out the gate with multiple revisions of hardware set to different specs, which could alter development for the foreseeable future of the entire console's life, not just towards the tail end where people are trying to optimize and give you the option of 4K resolution with a little bit of an FPS increase. This could completely change how games are developed, and I would consider it a bit of a concern. But enough of me rambling. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm kind of curious to see what you guys think. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time when hopefully I have more news to give you. Till then, I'm out.